There are three categories. The best category is you can win because of this quarterback. I think Josh fits squarely into that category. Aaron Glenn, he's not a guy you want to disappoint. And that's the superpower of a former player. He's got high energy. He's positive, you can tell. But he's also a guy that has a standard. I'm also looking at their D-line and saying, man, this is a real bright spot. I really like their front. I really do. We just read the depth chart on defense. Like, tell me where the holes are. You have the potential of being a really Mike Vrabel-y looking football team here. Welcome to the Greenlight Podcast presented by BetMGM. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code GREENLIGHT. You will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code GREENLIGHT. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. If that bet loses, you will receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets. Just make sure you use bonus code GREENLIGHT when you sign up. When the greatest player of all time leaves a division, it's a big deal. Everybody wonders who's gonna take advantage of the power vacuum, right? Tom Brady left. His last year in New England was 2019. 2020 ends up with the Bucs. That leaves an opportunity for the other teams in the division. And honestly, I'm not even sure if you could call it a power vacuum because Josh Allen had just finished year two in which he took a major jump. They just lost a wild card game in overtime. Like, I don't know if people can remember this far back. It's been 5 years already, but it's one of those things where the Josh Allen we know today, the guy that's reigned over division for half a decade, is probably not the guy that most of the football world expected to see in 2020 coming off that overtime game. I remember it being like, hey, we're still not sure if he can hit the broadside of the barn. You know, he's erratic. He's a running threat. He's exciting. But, you know, there were other things going on in the division. Like the Dolphins just got done tanking for Tua, which was, you know, a catchy bit of alliteration that people kind of talked about for the better part of 2 years. And, you know, the Jets are still the Jets. They're fucking up Sam Darnold's young career. The Pats are starting over. But I don't think anybody knew at that time, you know, how dominant the Bills would be in this division. They've owned it for half a decade now. And I think maybe the caveat there being that the people in Buffalo knew it. They went for it. They went out and traded for Stephon Diggs in March of 2020. I don't know if they planned on winning 5 straight division titles, but they knew their window was going to open. And I think they knew what they had in that quarterback. And this division now, 5 years later, consists of a Super Bowl contender, that's the Buffalo Bills, 2 teams that both have 8.5 game win totals. That's the Patriots and the Dolphins, who I think are going different directions. I think, like, I would liken it to 2 people passing each other on an escalator. You know, maybe not that drastic, but 2 teams going in different directions. Like Dolphins fans, if I were to ask you, like, would you rather be a Pats or a Dolphins fan right now? I think that maybe the most honest among you might admit that the Patriots are in a better spot in their build because there's more unknown, right? There's more ceiling to be realized, where you kind of know what you've seen in Miami, and we'll get into talking about that over the past couple of years with Mike McDaniel. And then there's one team in the New York Jets that they're emerging from a mushroom cloud. Man, this is the quietest offseason the Jets have had in some time. And the guy leading them in that build is a guy who I respect. And we'll talk more about the Jets in this breakdown as well. Later, much later in the breakdown. They got to go fourth. I mean, like, listen, I've been doing this, but ordering it based on how the teams have finished last year. And I think it works out nicely to go Bills, Dolphins, Pats, and Jets here in that order. So we'll start with the Bills. Listen, setting the stage for this season, they were so close last year. I thought that was of any of the years, the closest they've been. I think most people thought that, and it kind of culminated in a, can you finally pull the sword from the stone? Can you beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs? And they didn't. And they didn't really show. The offense was fantastic all year long. They scored 29 points in the AFC Championship game, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't up to Josh's standard. And in the big moments, it wasn't enough. There was the tush push, right? Which, we lamented that call on this show. It was kind of a controversial call, but they didn't get it. 4th and 5, with the game on the line, Spags dials up the blitz, no surprise, and Josh has nowhere to go with the football, lobs a prayer to Kincaid. Kincaid actually drops the football, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the offense didn't do enough and Josh didn't do enough. But as we tally this thing up in the Mahomes Allen saga, it is worth noting that at least in 2024, Josh Allen's looking across the field in that game at Chris Jones, at Trent McDuffie, at Bolton, a defense that's well established, right? And Mahomes, who doesn't need any help, he's the best quarterback on the planet, right? Until Josh beats him in the playoffs. He's looking at barbecue chicken once Benford got hurt in that game. And we talked a lot about Kyer Elam, who's no longer with the team now, and the way he got picked on in that game, and the safety room, which we saw months earlier in training camp. We went to visit the Bills, and we said, is that what we're rolling out this year? And they did, and they wrote it out with that group of safeties, and they wrote it until the wheels fell off, and they had to depend on a guy like Cole Bishop, who was a second-round pick for them, and they wanted him to develop a lot quicker. It was not ideal. And, you talk about Russian coverage working together. In that game, Rousseau and Epinesa, who are homegrown talents, first and second-round picks, combined for 2 pressures. And to go back to it, I think the offense was fantastic last year. They were great. They didn't show up when it mattered. And, you could build a narrative on that, but that would be a narrative that lacked context. I mean, I think there were games, obviously most notably the playoff game, the overtime game with Kansas City, that I was there for in a suite on some edibles watching my brother's Kansas City Chiefs at that stage in his career. And that was the greatest football game of all time. I mean, that's the way I felt. It was one of my first experiences watching an NFL game in a stadium after I retired was that game. And I was spoiled. I saw 2 of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen in that game. So, certainly along the way in this series, you could point to the Bills not being ready, but I thought Josh has played well in the postseason. And largely the offense has showed up. It's just been Mahomes and the Chiefs have beaten them. This was the first time that I thought, hey, the offense was a little bit disappointing. And, for that reason, I think it's an anomaly. I think if they get back there again, the offense should be business as usual, and that's about just playing your best game when it matters. This isn't like a trend where they've laid an egg in the playoffs, like, say, the Ravens offensively at different points. Like, I think the defense is the fire you got to put out coming off that AFC Championship game. And I don't think that's a secret, right? That's the situation to monitor as we break down the AFC East and ultimately the Bills' chances to get in the big dance and finally, get that 400-pound gorilla off their back that's been sitting there since the 4 Falls of Buffalo. And so, the defense led by Sean McDermott and Bobby Babich is going to be the group that we're going to take a look at first. The big swing guy is Maxwell Hairston. He's got to hit. I mean, he's the corner they bring in. He got hurt early in camp, and I remember when he got carted off, I was reading about it. I forget where we were. It's been a whirlwind of a couple weeks, but the stuff I read initially told me that he was going to be out for a long time. People are hugging him. They got the card out for the guy, and you're thinking, oh, the injury bug has hit this defense again. But luckily, you're going to get him back. And, in another stroke of luck, depending on how you look at it, you got Tre'Davious White, who can spell him until Maxwell Hairston gets back and continue to help him in his development as a player when he gets back. Like, Trey White didn't come back expecting to win a job. If the rookie could play, it was always going to be Benford and Hairston. That's what they want to happen. And I had heard some good things about Trey White in camp, but when you turn on the preseason tape, he does look like the same older version of Tre'Davious White, respectfully. So it's not somebody you want to hitch your wagon to. Hairston has to play well, and he has to come back healthy. And the playing well part of it, while the initial analysis out of Buffalo is that he's going to be a good player for them, that's no foregone conclusion. When you look all the way back at like the Kyer Elam situation, which reared its ugly head in the AFC Championship game, he was their first round pick in 2022. Benford was the 6th, and it's a lot like the San Francisco 49ers super quarterback deal, where you whiff on Trey Lance, but you find Brock Purdy late, and you're like, oh, we're just fine. It all comes out in the wash. Or the Max Crosby and Cleveland Farrell thing, where Mayock takes both of them. He ends up with a blue chip guy with one of the picks, but it's not the one you expected it to be. And, so you're fine, but it wasn't on purpose. I say all that to say, while they've done a good job and Brandon Beane's a hell of a GM and all that, like, it hasn't been an 100% hit rate. And so Hairston has to play well. That's a huge deal for them. He's the swing guy. If he's good, it's Hairston, Benford, and Teron Johnson, who is maybe one of the best nickels in the game. And so that's a great trio right there. If the rookie can play like a vet, the safety room's not good, and it continues to be an issue. And I think part of it, Nolan, is that you want to see your second round pick Cole Bishop develop, but it just hasn't happened yet. And so that's a question mark for me. Here's an interesting thing about the pass rush in Buffalo. And I mentioned, the championship game where, homegrown talent produces 2 pressures on the edge. Like, since 2015, the Bills have had 2 individual double-digit sack seasons by guys. Okay, I'm going to let you at home for about 5 seconds try to come up with who they are. Okay? Maybe write it down on a sheet of paper. I think you're going to be wrong. It was Lorenzo Alexander in 2016 with 12 and a half sacks. He was kind of a tweener. He was kind of a backer playing on the edge. And then Leonard Floyd, who's not homegrown talent, who's made his mark pretty much wherever he's played late in his career. He's in Atlanta now. He had 10 and a half in 2023. So while they've drafted high floor edges with Rousseau, who's a good player, Epinesa, who's solid, guys like Basham are no longer with the team. Ed Oliver, high floor guy at 9, like that's a fine pick at 9. There's good value there, but they have not been able to bring up through the ranks like a superstar. And even their swings at it through free agency haven't quite worked out. Brandon Beane said on Bussin' with the Boys that one trade he wished he made was the Von Miller trade when LA made it, right? You got the younger version of him, and obviously he had a lot to do with the Super Bowl in LA. And the Bills get a shot at Von Miller later, and what they get out of that is, an elite rusher who's dealing with injuries and age. And so the return on investment there was limited. If things break right on the edge, I think they've got the guys this year, but they have to break right. The influx of guys that they're banking on playing well for them this year, it's a free agent in Joey Bosa. It's a free agent in Michael Hoyt. And it's a draft pick in Landon Jackson out of Arkansas, right? Hoyt supposedly is having a great camp, but he's suspended. So the what ifs have happened, not through injury, but you already got the suspension bug biting you. That's a 6-game suspension for him, and he's a good, versatile player. So if it works out, he's a solid contributor. Everybody's happy. The dream situation, fever dream for Buffalo Bills fans is probably like, maybe there's some ceiling that's been unrealized because he's had to do a lot of different things in LA, and his versatility might have limited his production. And maybe McDermott can simplify things or get something out of him schematically that we didn't know he had in him, like a mini Zach Bond situation. I'm not saying he's going to be like a DPOI candidate or something like that, or be an all pro. But, even if the Hoyt thing works out, to the best of your imagination, right? Like it's the best possible situation. It's still a solid player. The guy you need to work out for you is Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa has still got that Batman production in him. By Batman, I always say this, like, do you have a true number one edge? The Bills haven't had that superstar on the edge since Mario Williams. And I would argue really inside, they haven't had a guy like Kyle Williams since Kyle Williams. And so, you need him to stay healthy and be the best version of a Joey Bosa on this side of 30 that he can be. So everything has to break right. And, Landon Jackson, who's, a good rookie prospect who's got some, we met him at the Sack Summit. He's got a Max Crosby frame. He's got a lot of upside to him. He's still going to be a rookie. So while you hope that trio produces something, the guy that's going to have the most pressure on him is Joey Bosa. He's got to stay healthy. He's got to play well. And then they need the draft picks inside to play well. They're throwing a lot at the wall and hoping it sticks here. They end up with a second rounder with TJ Sanders, who's twitchy. He's like a true one gap guy. I saw him in his preseason action, like hit a couple inside moves, looks twitchy. I like the kid. Mm-hmm. They added a guy named Walker from Kentucky, who's an enormous human being. Who there's good camp reviews on him, and it's not all about the pass rush, right? You've got to be able to stop the run. One thing that to me that they've looked in some of their biggest matchups is a little light in the ass up front, and part of that is because of the body types they like to bring in. But they have to stop the run. When you're losing to Kansas City in the playoffs, you're like, we got to put the fire out in the secondary, right? Because Mahomes, Andy Reid, they'll find you. Whoever the weak link is, they'll find you. And then when you're playing the Ravens, which is another team you got to go through in the AFC, for instance, you got to be able to stop the run. So they're kind of trying to put two fires out at once, and the guys inside, the young guys, are going to help a lot in the run game if you can realize their potential early and hopefully in the pass rush. And I don't know if this is a reflection of how they feel about Daquan Jones, but he is on the final year of his contract. So we'll see what happens up front. Another check in the durability concern department with the Buffalo Bills is Matt Milano, who he's been on IR the last 2 years, and he was one of my favorite players in the league when he was at his best. It's getting to the point where he hasn't been his best long enough that I kind of wonder if it's in there. And so this is a big year for him. He's certainly, when he goes, he can really make them go. So, Bean was asked, again, on Bussin' with the Boys, shout out to those guys, if he could bring in any player in the NFL to play for his team, and he said Myles Garrett. Now, that might be a cop-out, right, because he is the best defensive player in the game, arguably. But it's hard to imagine that Bean doesn't have pass rush on the top of his mind. Remember, this defense plays zone, and they don't blitz a lot. So that creates a situation up front where the fractions of time are not in your favor as a rusher, and you have to play that much better. So that's the deal. Like, the defense has to play better in the biggest moments, and you have to think about, like, how do you beat the teams that you have to go through? So we got to put the fire out in the back end, and we got to stop the run up front, and we have to find a Batman-type rusher. If they can do two of those three things, they'll be a lot better off. If they can do all three, now we're cooking. Right? Offensively, I'm going to keep it simple with this offense. You got one of the best quarterbacks on the planet, right? And I don't care how you order them at ESPN. I personally think Josh is one of the best three quarterbacks on the planet. I think because of his track record in the playoffs relative to Lamar Jackson, I put him at 2. But it really doesn't matter because all these guys fit into the one category. I feel like there are 3 categories. Okay, the best category is you can win because of this quarterback. I think Josh fits squarely into that category. Next category is you can win with him, and then the third is you can win despite that quarterback. The latter two classifications don't really matter here. Josh is a guy you can win because of. I think that's what makes them in a post, hey, we paid our quarterback era, still dangerous. And last year is evidence of that. So, you're a running football team. Since Joe Brady came along, he said, hey, we're not going to put everything on Josh's shoulders, as tempting as that is to do because he's like a one-man band. The turnovers went down. The run game got better. You got James Cook inked up to a big deal here. So all that's in the past. You have an offensive line that, is probably one of the better groups in the league. They have a 3% sack rate. You've got good tackles, solid interior. The backs catch the ball out of the backfield. All that's well and good. And a year ago, you worried about the wide receiver room. You said, hey, how are they going to turn the page into this chapter after you pay Josh Allen without the weapons outside? Well, that's the point. If a quarterback's worth paying, he should be able to elevate the pieces around him. And I think last year proved that he can do that. And last year proved that this team can run through the backs and the tight ends. They're going to run 12 personnel. They're going to be committed to the run game. if Josh is dinged, because they do like to run the ball with Josh. I think back to that Dallas game a couple years ago where he throws the ball 17 times. That's a new look for them where it's like we can lean on something else. And there are other examples of that where the run game kind of takes over for them. You also realize in the process that Shakir is probably the best slot guy that Josh has had. And Keon Coleman, while a lot of people wanted to see more his rookie year, I saw the flashes. You want another guy that can probably win matchups for you and complicate the way you game plan for this group, right? And I think that's where they turned to Amari Cooper last year. And while it didn't produce great returns, there were moments. But not having him this year doesn't mean that they're in some bad spot. Enter Josh Palmer. Josh Palmer's a swing guy in this offense to me. I mean, Amari Cooper caught probably 20 balls in the regular season. He had about 40 yards receiving in the playoffs, so he wasn't like a huge factor late in the season for them. But having that number two-ish guy, right, that's versatile, can work inside and outside for them, would be a big deal. And I think Josh Palmer, considering they were balling on a budget, right, going out and trying to find that guy, but up against it a little bit with the cap, Josh Palmer on a 3-year deal is a pretty good option for them. And when he was in LA, he was a guy who was kind of buried behind Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, and he never really reached his perceived ceiling, if you ask Chargers fans. I think being an elite quarterback, that's your job, to get that out of him. And I'm not calling Justin Herbert a bum or anything, but he's not a capital E elite quarterback. I don't even think he's a lowercase e elite quarterback at this point. And I'm a fan of the guy, but there are levels. And so Josh Allen elevating Josh Palmer, I can totally see it. You've got this great quote from Josh Allen. His what do you like about Joshua Palmer? His separation with his feet, his body language, his catch rate is one of the best I've ever been around. And when I met Josh Allen, he told me, he said the first thing he said to me was, "You look great." And I was working on like 5 hours sleep and about I deleted about 20 Miller Lights the night before. So I think he was lying. I think maybe he's a glass half full guy, and I think he likes to say the nice thing. But I tend to believe him on Josh Palmer, right? Like Josh Palmer looks great. He's got the best catch radius of anybody I've been around. He's a great route runner. We know that about Josh Palmer. Now it's just time for him to take the next step and help them. Like I said, he can work inside, he can work outside, and hopefully he'll make them a lot better. Because this offense is not broken. There's no need to fix it. As I said before, it's about them showing up when it mattered. It was there for them in the AFC Championship. They didn't play their best game. They got hopefully better with Josh Palmer. You get James Cook inked to a long-term deal, get that in the past, and just continue down the path you're on. That's what makes them contenders, having this quarterback, having this run game, and playing in a division, quite frankly, where the challengers are not like the types of teams in the NFC North or even in the NFC West, where you look at some of those teams with track records and say, like, hey, at least they know. Hey, the Niners are down right now, but Kyle Shanahan's the coach. They have a way of doing things. The Rams are not perfect, but they got Sean McVay. They got Matt Stafford. I don't see the same crop of challengers in this division, which also makes Buffalo even more dangerous come December and January, because chances are they're going to win their division and play in a home game at least. They're also the type of team that's got a chance to play for home field advantage. So you move to whoever's next in this breakdown. Let's go with the Miami Dolphins.
You should stand corrected. Good morning. False. Great morning. Let's go.
Why great?
What
makes this one great?
Because we're another day closer to death.
So that was Mike McDaniel, and I don't know if he was saying that because the training camp's gone so poorly for them, some of the injuries and everything he's been through over the last couple of years. I just think he's a funny-ass guy. I just want to say this to level set the whole thing. I am the guy that threw eggs at the Dolphins hype train when it left this station in 2022, and I've been flying into a headwind the last couple of years, trying to communicate what I think the problems with this team are. And a lot of the times, like, because of their performances against not so good teams, it was hard to poke holes in the operation. But every time they face a test of any magnitude, they fail. And if you remember how this thing got off, got off to its start. It was 2022. I think Tua put up like 470 yards on a beat up Ravens secondary in like week 1 or 2, and then they turn around and he was in 2-minute mode that whole game, and they turn around and beat the Bills in Miami. Buffalo's got a bunch of guys missing, and I sound crazy. I'm like, yeah, but and a couple years later, they're 3-13 in the McDaniel era against teams with winning records. I mean, you take the playoff team figure, I don't even know what that stat comes out to, but it's kind of irrelevant anymore. I used to have to show my work on this. I don't have to anymore. I think the narrative has been cemented at this point. And I think if you watch this team, you know what my problem is with the team. I mean, I have problems with the quarterback, although he's one of the best at throwing underneath stuff with timing, anticipation. If the play's getting off without a hiccup, he's as good as anybody in the league. Like when it's 7-on-7, he's fantastic. There are shades of Drew Brees in his game, right? But the difference is, to me, and this is in today's NFL, like you need a guy who can play off schedule, who can play off platform, who can play with pressure in his face. When the play breaks down, when it goes longer than 2.5 seconds, when the run game isn't dominant, when Tyreek Hill isn't cooking, a secondary that doesn't have all their guys or whatnot. Like when they're not playing the 2023 Denver Broncos, where they scored 70 points, they'll wow you. But when they play the good teams, the Ravens that year, when they play the Eagles that year, when they played the Bills that year, and the Bills do such a good job on the edge, you could see that not only are there teams that can schematically take advantage, but it seemed like there are teams that just have an edge mentally against this team. The first year when they had that start and then Tua had the concussion against Cincinnati, a lot of people said, hey, this team's elite if Tua's healthy. And obviously with his injury history and the concussions, that's a big if. But if he's healthy, they're elite. In 22, Tua came back from that concussion, and there was like a 5-game streak where they went 5-0. And when you tally up the teams that they beat in that stretch, it was like they averaged 6 wins on that season. And people jump out of the gym. So you want to see him in 23 where Tua's healthy, and he was largely. And they failed all the big tests. And then in a sick twist of fate, they go play in Kansas City in a game where there are fans coming down with hypothermia and getting their digits amputated. And that's what this warm weather team with this track record is supposed to – they're supposed to go to Arrowhead, which is one of the toughest places in the NFL to play against that defense, and stack up. It just didn't look like anything close to what it needed to be. And so they quite frankly got bullied in that situation. 2024 was a deal where the wheels fell off. And I think what you saw is like the first 2 years, that was the open window for this team. I think 2023 was their best shot at it. And in 24, obviously, Tua missed like 6 games on an 8-win team. You could argue they would have made the playoffs, and I'm not going to argue with you. Like there's a chance this team would have been able to rattle off enough wins had he been healthy to get in the playoffs. But I just know who they are. And I think that's the issue. 3-13 against winning teams in the McDaniel era. That's just not good enough. And so, where the run game's not good enough last year, the offensive line's not good enough. That to me is you got to fix the things you can control in this season in 2025. And so on a team that hasn't won the big game when things are right with the roster, and there's been a number of good players who have left this organization over the past couple of years, this year the roster is not in the shape it's been in the past with this team. And part of it is because they went for it and they don't have as many draft picks over the past couple of years where, you start to see that stuff come to fruition in a negative way. And part of it is just because they haven't been strong enough on the offensive line, and they're always trying to patch it together. I mean, this year, look at them. They're replacing Armstead with Patrick Paul, who had 3 starts. They bring in James Daniels off an Achilles. Aaron Brewer played well for them last year. They've got a guard from Arizona named Siva Inaya, who they moved up to get. They're excited about him, but he's also a rookie. Right tackle Austin Jackson played in 8 games last year. He's hurt. He's expected back for week 1. So, the starting 5, there's a lot of ifs. And, for a quarterback, that has struggled under pressure and could really use like an Eagles offensive line, right? Like I don't know how he'd look behind an Eagles offensive line, but it would be better than he'd look behind an offensive line like this and the offensive lines that he's accustomed to playing behind. That's a concern. Now, I do like the depth. Brunskill, they bring him in. He was with McDaniel in San Francisco. He's played 5 positions. Those guys are rare. The guard play was terrible last year. It really affected their ceiling in the run game and the pass game. Eichenberg, Jones hit the market, and he didn't get a big deal. So it's not like they're missing anything with him. You got to fix this group. And Achan's your guy, man. I think he's going to have a really good season. Mostert's gone. Ollie Gordon's the rookie 6th rounder who runs pretty hard. We've seen him in preseason turning some heads. But the big question to me is if all these things work out right for them, and I haven't even mentioned Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle or those guys staying healthy, or can Nick Westbrook-Akine be a good number 3 for them? No, it's all a moot point if they can't win the big games, if they can't step up and put their big boy pants on when they play the good teams. And, some Miami Dolphin fans are going to sit here, listen to this and say, well, this is a pretty reductive take, or, it's too simple. But I think a lot of their problems are between the ears, and it's about showing up when it matters. Now, the defense, you talk about 2 holes this team has, and I'm not sure there's a team that's gone very far in the playoffs over the past couple of years with both of these issues. The offensive line, I just mentioned that, and the corner room. The corner room is like, it's a structure fire, man. I don't know if there's a worse corner room situation in the NFL. The secondary going into the season, you lose Javon Holland. At least you got Jalen Ramsey, but they trade him away, and it's only gotten worse. Kader Kuho was probably their best cover guy. He's more of a slot guy, but he gets hurt. And now outside you got Storm Duck and Kendall Sheffield, who's a veteran they brought in during rookie minicamp who hasn't started a game in half a decade. So that's a tough deal. If you have aspirations of going places in the NFL, that's a tough place to be in your secondary. Now, Minkah Fitzpatrick's coming back. Minkah Fitzpatrick is a great player, but he's going to have some gray hairs playing with these guys, getting guys lined up, watching film on Mondays, seeing some of the corner play outside of him. And not to mention the guy playing next to him is not a sure thing. Melon Fonwu, who was with the Lions, and Ashton Davis are the guys competing for that second safety spot. And Melon Fonwu is more of a blitzer, like a box player. So you assume it's Ashton Davis and Minkah Fitzpatrick. I tip my cap to a guy like Mike Hilton, who's been one of my favorite players, for a number of years now. He's in the latter part of his career, but he's playing nickel with this group. Minkah Fitzpatrick's playing safety. I want to send those guys some love. I'm praying for these guys, man. I'm also looking at their D-line and saying, man, this is a real bright spot on a team that, I've kind of pigeonholed as having a personality, this team, about not being tough sometimes. Like, I really like their front. I really do. Chop Robinson he's going to be one of, maybe not the premier rushers over the next decade, but one of the very good rushers in the NFL. You hear Deion Dawkins talk about him after year 1. There are people that think he's going to be pretty good. 2 back-to-back years for Zach Sealer with double-digit sacks. Where he plays on the interior, that's really rare. I think he's a guy that if he had 22 sacks, he wouldn't make a Pro Bowl. There's just some guys that like fans don't know, fans don't respect, and he's one of them. But he's a hell of a player. And then the other 2 guys that have injury concerns, which affect the outlook of this team. If I'm handicapping this team, like your strongest unit outside of maybe the wideouts, is probably this defensive line. And 2 of the guys that they're really going to need have had a ton of injury history. And in Bradley Chubb, who got drafted by Cowboy Reed's Broncos God's team and was fantastic out of the gate. He's one of my favorite young players to watch. Just a power player, man. A power rusher's power rusher. And he's had a lot of injuries. He's still had about 40 sacks in his career, and he's missed about half the time that he's been eligible to play in the NFL because of bad luck and injuries. And then Jalen Phillips, who to me he has a chance to be one of the best edge guys in the game, but has not been able to stay healthy. And he had an injury history in college, I believe, that was concussions. And now in the NFL, it's been a lot of lower body injuries and that sort of thing. But those guys got to stay healthy. They're really good players. They drafted Kenneth Grant, who's a monstrous guy out of Michigan. They got to be more physical. I just wanted to send out, some props to that group because I love the way they play. It's not everything about the Dolphins that elicits disdain in me personally. I think the front's a lot of fun. And now the bright side is the best version of this team. You've invested in the offensive line. Maybe they're ahead of schedule. Maybe you fix the guard position. Maybe you end up with a healthy Tua, and maybe because Tyreek Hill ended the season with that rant, which I think was kind of emblematic of that team culture. He's 31. He wants to get the bag one more time. Maybe he plays his best football. They say he lost some weight. Maybe the run game gets going again. Maybe Darren Waller out of the studio to reunite with Frank Smith, finds the fountain of youth. But that's a lot of friggin' maybes, for an offense that's going to be asked to score a lot of points, because I don't know if they're going to be able to stop the pass unless that pass rush plays like the fearsome foursome or something like that. So
a quick producer's note, at the time of tape, Matthew Judon had not signed with the Miami Dolphins. So take everything that Chris just said about the Miami Dolphins defensive line and add Matthew Judon.
If they figure all that out, though, and they're kind of like what they were in 2023 offensively, they still have to get over the hump mentally. They still have to. It's between the ears, right? And so beating the best teams in the NFL, are they good enough to do it? I don't know. A lot of that comes down to the quarterback, but I think it's also mental as well. Listen, 2022, we saw 8 coaches get hired, I think. And there's only a couple left, one of them being Mike McDaniel. I think he's one of the best coaches in that crop, obviously. I think he's a good football coach. I think schematically he's ahead of the game. But he's one of the only ones left. And I think the temperature on his heated seat is rising. So this is a big year for him. It's a big year for the entire program. Like I said, they've lacked toughness and resolve at times, and ultimately I think they paid a quarterback who's good, not great. And I say that with respect. I know at times that I've been, because of the fans, and I do regret this, Dolphins fans can be pretty confrontational if you don't agree with them. And at times I've kind of gone back at them rather than just analyzing the game. I regret that. But one thing I will say unapologetically is I think he's a good quarterback, not great. I think he's a middle of the pack quarterback. When you aggregate his skills with his weaknesses, the delta between his skills and his weaknesses, it's so big. The skills to me, when things are on time, he's great. When he's not touched, he's great. When the ball's out in 2.5 seconds, he's great. But as we know so much of football, look around the NFL at the guys who are standing there in January. They're artists outside the pocket. They extend plays. They make plays off platform. They make people miss, and so I think he's got to play better. Listen, Brian Flores was too mean. Vic Fangio was too mean. Both those guys are thriving elsewhere. You hear things about the Lions joint practice, the cultural difference between those two teams, the way they practice. They've got a lot to prove this year, and I think a lot of it, even on a good day, is between the ears. So, you talk about this team as an 8.5 win total team. That's kind of, it could go either way kind of situation. I think the next team we're talking about is the same kind of team, but they think they're ascending. And I think their fans are right to assume that. Drake Maye, we sat down and talked to him at the Super Bowl. I'm a fan of this kid. I thought there were flashes last year. Listen, they threw him in the fire, and I wasn't a fan of when they threw him in the fire. I remember kind of being like, hey, you run the risk of killing this kid or getting him shell-shocked at the very least, throwing him behind that offensive line with the weapons that they had in New England last year. And to his credit, he was very tough. I talked about, the game where forget who they were playing, but it was the Texans. And Danielle Hunter hit him, and I timed it. I think he was down for 13.5 seconds in the first game he came in. And I said to myself, look, I'm right. Like, I hate to say it, but I think this guy's going to get killed out here. And to his credit, they just kept building. And if there's one thing Gerard Mayo did that I think is going to last for the Patriots, it's they were able to stick the landing on getting this guy some really valuable on-the-job experience without killing him, which you might say, hey, whoop-de-doo. But That's a big deal to me. And going into year 2, at least now you have some tape to build off of, some reps to build off of. They got a real offensive coordinator in Josh McDaniels, who I've actually played under, not offensively, right? I played defense, but he was our offensive coordinator for a short stint in St. Louis when Sam Bradford enjoyed a lot of success early in his career. Obviously, when I was in New England, I got to watch him and Brady work, and obviously the results have been variable, right? Like as a head coach, I don't see it. You got your look in Denver at it. You got your look in Vegas at it. But for a guy that was so polarizing as a head coach, and some of the player reviews of the culture he built was so negative, people rushed to hire this dude. Like, I know it's a New England thing, and I know that like New England has almost been incestuous with kind of like the let's keep it in the building type thing, and Vrabel's an extension of that, but Vrabel is totally different. Like Vrabel's going to run his shit differently. You're going to have the bones of a New England structure, and his time playing in New England and that sort of thing. Like he's a Patriot, but he's not going to be Bill. And so I don't think they made this hire just to enforce a culture that existed before Mike Vrabel. I think they made this hire because this guy's a good offensive coordinator and he's going to fit well with Drake Maye. So bringing him in, that's a big deal. I think the biggest question marks in this team offensively are going to be who can be the supporting 2 or maybe, like the ascending 1 in the future for them, because Stephon Diggs, at this stage in his career, he's a 1, but there's a lot of like what ifs. What if he gets hurt? What if he's getting older? That sort of thing. The offensive line has got to be better. And I think one of the biggest things that Patriots fans were holding their breath on was Will Campbell, like with the short arms thing. And I know there's differing opinions on, does arm length matter for tackles? I think it absolutely does. But I think some guys can work around it. And hopefully that's the case with Will Campbell. The reviews so far in camp are that, he's going to be a player in this league. Like, I don't know that he's going to be able to block every guy that he sees on the schedule, that he's going to have trouble with certain guys early in his career. But they think he's a pro tackle. And that's a big sigh of relief. Like early in camp for a rookie, you can't tell like what the guy's going to look like throughout his NFL career necessarily, but you can tell that hey, is this like when Aaron Donald came to camp, I was like, yeah, Aaron Donald's going to Hall of Fame. Like you knew it because he's an outlier. When Jason Smith came to camp out of Baylor, I was like, this guy's not going to last because he's an outlier. Those are 2 outliers on either end of the spectrum. Will Campbell seems to fit in the middle, and we'll see how the development of the player goes. But so far, there's a big sigh of relief, I think, in New England from what I hear on the fact that he's not like one of these guys, and I don't like using the word bust, but like that you're just like, we can't play him. I think he'll develop. Now, Cole Strange, on the other hand, the word out of New England is that he's on his last leg, and Ben Brown and Jared Wilson factor into that left guard conversation, which, couple things here. Cole Strange was a head scratcher when Bill drafted him. Like there were a lot of people scratching their heads about that thing. It's proven to be a failed experiment from what I hear and what I see on tape. That was Bill's last pick. Like that was Bill's last first pick. And so that deal is like a little bit of like a middle finger, maybe not purposefully on the way out the door, but like now you got to deal with the Cole Strange thing. Bradbury's a veteran at center. Onwenu is a good player. Morgan Moses, Wahoo, Virginia guy. He's carved out a really good career as a right tackle in the NFL and bounced around a bit over the latter years of his career, but he's a guy who can help this entire group and help Drake Maye. So we get to the wide receivers. We talked about Diggs needing to be the number 1. If he's not, who's that going to be? Mac Hollins is not a number 1, certainly, but he's a guy who's valuable in that room. It's also a, hey, tell me everything you know about Buffalo kind of thing. With Mac Hollins, having spent some time in Buffalo, you're working around Polk, who was a disappointing rookie, and Bourne, who had some really good years, has not been that guy for them, at least this year in camp. Boute's had a good camp. Demario Douglas is kind of a gadget type guy. Kyle Williams. The question is, who's going to emerge as the number 2? We need a solid number 2, and in the future we're going to need a number 1. But at this juncture right now, We just got to have good quality play outside of Stephon Diggs. You need Stephon Diggs to stay healthy. Travion Henderson is turning some heads. So the running game, which has been honestly at times, like I know it was Cincinnati, but last year one of the best moments, they ran dive solid to death against the Bengals and ran the ball up their ass, and the Bengals couldn't get off the field. They got to be able to run the football. So the offensive line, who's going to step up at receiver? Yeah, Henry and Hooper, good veterans, man. Like Hunter Henry coming over from the Chargers years ago, like just been solid, steady for them. And Hooper obviously is getting into the ancient stage in his career, but like they're veterans that can help a quarterback. And so, while they might not turn heads offensively every week, like we talk about a Mike Vrabel spot. We talked about a lot when he was in Tennessee. Like, what does it mean to be a Mike Vrabel coach team? That means being able to muddy it up. That means being able to beat better teams because you can muddy it up. If the team that's better than you is lining up and saying, hey, this is the type of game we want to play, you'd be playing into our hands to play this game. Mike Vrabel has been really good at crafting game plans that kind of say, no, we're going to go over here. Like, the Malik Willis game against the Chiefs, in Arrowhead a couple years ago, I think about situations like that where you're like, how is this a game? It's because they're scrappy and they figure out ways to raise the floor of the football team by playing complementary football and, quite frankly, by being kind of the inverse of the team we just talked about. Like that's what to me is so exciting about the Patriots is, you're playing in a division where I see some opportunities. Like the Jets, we'll get to them in a second. We talked about them emerging from mushroom cloud. The Dolphins have not played with that edge. They haven't played with that toughness. I'm sure Mike Vrabel's looking at them like food. And as we get to the defense here, you talk about like how you match up with the Dolphins, for instance, in division. Barmore, Williams, White, Landry, Tonga at nose tackle. They've assembled a pass rush unit that, quite frankly, like the work still has to be done. They weren't dominant last year, and somebody's got to emerge as that number one rusher. But I've been singing Keon White's praises. Having Barmore back is big. Milton Williams is going to be one of the guys that fans hang on his stat line every week because of how much money they paid him. Landry is a guy that some people say, hey, maybe you overpaid him, but he knows the Mike Vrabel deal. He was in Tennessee. They bring in Spillane, who to me is, a pretty good run defender at backer. You bring in Carlton Davis to pair with Gonzalez. Carlton Davis was really good after leaving Tampa, an under the radar signing for the Lions. And you pair him with Gonzalez. That's a really good corner room. And Marcus Jones and nickel, like, we just read the depth chart on defense. Like, tell me where the holes are. Like, you need the guys up front to kind of take the next step. But you have the potential of being a really Mike Vrabel-y looking football team here. If the offense can just maintain a high floor and run the football, the defense is going to be physical and rushing coverage are going to work hand in hand. I'm excited about the Patriots football team this year. That's why I say the escalator is going one way for them, and for the Dolphins, it's going the other way. I think the Patriots have a better chance to knock off a good football team than the Dolphins do. The Dolphins might get more style points along the way, but when you play those teams that you have to muddy it up with because your roster is not where you want it to be at this stage in the build, I think the coach and I think the culture in New England and the defense, as we just talked about, can be something you lead with. Without further ado, this is the part of the breakdown we've all been waiting for. The New York Jets. Listen, like, they have become, bear with me here, like the bad version of the Cowboys. Honestly, it's like one team we talk about because they were good in the 90s. The Jets we talk about because they haven't been good since then. Like, yes, the Rex Ryan years and everything, but like the Jets are a factory of sadness. And for some reason, national media is obsessed with them. I think it's the market size and that sort of thing. But it's also over the past couple of years because of just like the lowest lows. Like their floor as an organization has been so low. Like they damn near ruined Sam Darnold's career. They said he was out there seeing ghosts. Like at every chapter, you remember something like Zach Wilson throwing the defense on the bus, like just being a turnover machine. There was the Adam Gase years. There was the Aaron Rodgers saga last year, which, that seemed to be – they were trying to take a shortcut, right, to get out of this funk. There's going to be no shortcuts, right? And I think that's what the Jets have realized. It was a very mature line of thinking for an organization that just hasn't been mature. Hey, we're going to blow this up. We're going to do things the right way. We're going to build this thing with a guy who, he just came from Detroit and Aaron Glenn. And in the second half of last season, it didn't matter who was playing on defense for them. They lined up and they made it work. It wasn't pretty all the time, but he was playing guys that had just come in off the street. And he's a former player. He's the type of guy to me that when you walk in the cafeteria in the morning, he's got like a shit-eating grin on his face. He's got his cup of coffee. It's probably like the third one, I imagine. And he looks happy to be there, but he's not a guy you want to disappoint. That's kind of, and that's the superpower of a former player. He's got high energy. He's positive, you can tell, but he's also a guy that has a standard. And he comes from a program that's building a tree now, right? You got Ben Johnson in Chicago, not just, one of the hottest young head coaches in the league, but like the one that was handpicked to rescue Caleb Williams, and the one that had, the freedom to pick his destination. Like he was a good enough candidate that people waited around for a year for him. Like, Detroit's doing a good job. Like Aaron Glenn now with a head coaching job, like I kind of feel like this works in the long term. I don't think, again, it's not a shortcut. I don't think they're going to win 10 games this year. But I think where Aaron Glenn comes from, what he's seen, what he's going to implement defensively, which I think we'll get to that in a second, is going to really fit the guys on the roster. And for the Jets, I think him coming in town and saying, hey, we're going to be a little like the Lions, right? They bring over Tanner Engstrand from Detroit. He was the passing game coordinator, but you can bet they're going to have a lot of run game similarities to Detroit. Like, and they should. They got to lean into this offensive line. I think they have a good offensive line. The fact of the matter is, you draft Olu Fashanu, who, I could see it pretty clearly, pretty early that like he's going to be a player. Membu's got a hit, right? Like if you can bookend two really good tackles, you got guys inside that have been there a little bit. Elijah Vera Tucker, Simpson. I'm forgetting the fifth guy here.
Joe Tippmann.
Guy with the mullet.
Yep.
So it's a good group, man. Like I would even go as far as saying when you add the two backs into the equation, and Hall and Allen, that this is like, we haven't even gotten to Garrett Wilson. This is maybe the best situation Justin Fields has been in, which is fucked up to say. You're like, okay, this guy's on his third team. He's not going to find the optimal offensive situation until he gets to the New York Jets. Garrett Wilson, to me, I respect the hell out of this kid. Having been a high draft pick on bad teams in inopportune situations, it is really hard to justify where you were picked. This guy has gone above and beyond, in justifying where he was picked. He's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver his whole career. Look at the list of guys he's caught footballs from. He deserves some sort of a medal for what he's been through. Not to mention, I don't think he exactly gelled with Aaron Rodgers last year. So, Justin Fields, as imperfect of a situation as that might be, and, maybe not how you draw it up to start your build, like you're taking a flyer on a guy who at one point last year, people were like, oh, he's the Steelers starter. And at certain points in his Chicago career, we were like, don't do it. Don't get rid of him. Like, see this through. Whether we were right or wrong, I think this is a low cost gamble, right? Like you can get out of this thing in a year. You can draft a quarterback in 2026. That class will be deeper. But for the time being, you're going to run the fuck out of the football with two good backs. You've got a true number one outside. You bring in Taylor from LSU, tight end, and your offensive line is pretty solid. And not to mention, you have one thing that the Detroit Lions didn't have in Detroit, which is a running quarterback. Now, I'm sure you'd rather have Jared Goff. A lot of people would say that. I would agree. But, that does muddy things up for opposing defenses. Like, I've been on defenses where you have to game plan for the quarterback run game. It's a totally different deal. So I think their aim is going to be keep the possessions down, run the football, play tough defense. And that's what Aaron Glenn majors in, the defense, right? I could say this about the offense. Listen, like I reeled off some offensive linemen who were pretty good that were on the roster. Garrett Wilson, the backs. And shout out to Joe Douglas and those guys. Like, I know it didn't work out, but for a head coach that in Aaron Glenn, a lot of times you're like, damn, that coach just kind of took a job he had to take, right? Because unless you're Ben Johnson, you don't really turn down NFL coaching gigs. This is one that, if you were blindfolded and told me Aaron Glenn's got to take the Jets job, I'd be like, man, he's fucking set up. He, with no context, you say he's probably set up. He's going to coach the Jets. Look around the house that he's supposed to be remodeling. There's some fucking nice furniture in this house. Like, there really is. Like, some of the things have to be moved around, and we need to add some accent pieces, maybe some artwork on the walls, right? New coat of paint in the entry hall. But like Sauce Gardner, Jermaine Johnson, Will McDonald, Quinnen Williams, Sherwood, who they resigned, Tony Adams, like, there's some good players here. And I haven't named all of them. You take a look at the roster. But when I talk about defensive backfield, and it's a shame they couldn't keep DJ Reed because Sauce and him would have been great fits for Aaron Glenn's defense. They got a cheaper version in Brandon Stevens, who I'd rather have DJ Reed, but you do save $10 million doing that. And I thought at times he struggled in Baltimore, but I think supposedly he's having a good camp. And Sauce, as I mentioned, is a perfect fit for a guy that's going to man up, that's going to press, that's going to be aggressive. Like, this defense is going to be a little bit stingy. And you still got Michael Carter. You bring in Cisco, who I didn't love in Jacksonville, but like supposedly he's having a great camp. Maybe Aaron Glenn's like the DB whisperer, man. Last year again, he had to coach a lot of guys who shouldn't have been out there. So when you talk about this team, I don't think they're going anywhere fast, but I think they're moving in the right direction, at least in the offseason, year one for Aaron Glenn. Number one, you can tell Aaron Glenn has probably preached in the building, like, I don't want to be heard, I want to be seen. And I think that's great. I think that's great. Let's no longer be the minor league Dallas Cowboys. I don't want to have to answer for my quarterback talking about Mike Williams being on the wrong side of the red line on a Monday. And what do you get out of that? You get like the 18th, 20th best passing attack in the league. Like, that wasn't worth the gamble, right? Like, let's build this thing honestly. Wilkes is there, who's obviously a guy who's been a head coach in Arizona. He's been a DC, bounced around Carolina, San Francisco, respected guy. I think having a former head coach on the staff, we always talk about this, is really valuable for a young head coach. You talk about bringing the passing game coordinator over to make him the coordinator, a little continuity from Detroit and Engstrand. And I like where they're headed. They might not get there fast, but this is going to be a scrappy team. So, another thing is, I'm really interested. I hate to keep coming back to the Dolphins, but I am interested to see what the Jets look like matching up against the Dolphins offense. Like, that's going to be a fun deal where you're challenging these receivers and the rushers are getting home. And, it's the same goes for playing the Patriots. Like, they probably feel like, although they might not have Super Bowl aspirations in their hearts of hearts at this stage, they probably feel like they match up pretty well with teams in the division. And so while the AFC East might not be a 4-horse race, there's going to be some fucking jockeying for position. And in some of these late season games where you got the Jets on your schedule and you got to win a division game, I don't think it's going to be that fun. And you talk about the Patriots and the way they're ascending, and the Dolphins, even on their worst day, you still got a game plan for Tyreek Hill. The run game should be a lot better. The front is tough to deal with. I think it's a very interesting division. that I see Buffalo owning, maybe not running away with, but that, you know, their reign continues, and these teams are all in different stages of builds, right? Like, you know, New England's a year or two ahead of the Jets, and you know, it's funny, the Dolphins are heading down the escalator. I wonder what they'd tell the Patriots if they could give them a little bit of advice. Maybe I'd tell them not to pay a guy that you're not sure about. And maybe they were sure about him. What do you guys think about the AFC East?
Well, just to kind of put a bow on it, the way you were tying it up there is like a Vrabel coached Patriots team. We know what the Bills are about. A Glenn coached Jets team. There's just going to be a lot of fuck you football played in this division this year, which makes it really fun, and also brings you back to the Dolphins and makes you wonder how they match up. But
yeah, it's a weird personality fit in that neighborhood.
yeah,
You know,
right.
You know, there's some physicality going on around them, and they have to get that right. So, again, you know, interesting division. We will be back later in the week with the AFC South. We are working clockwise. Thanks for listening.